What if magic wasn't just the stuff of fairy tales, but something people truly believed in, fought over, and even died for? Across centuries and continents, the idea of divine magic has woven itself into the very fabric of human history, leaving behind stories so strange, so breathtaking, they blur the line between myth and reality. Picture this: ancient priests summoning forces beyond comprehension, sacred objects that defied the laws of nature, and ordinary people who claim to wield power straight from the heavens. These aren't just legends, they're fragments of a world where the impossible felt within reach, where faith and mystery collided in ways that still leave us questioning everything we think we know. Today, we're diving into 30 of history's most captivating tales of divine magic stories that will make you wonder, shudder, and maybe even reconsider what's truly possible. From the shimmering temples of Egypt to the shadowy monasteries of medieval Europe, these accounts aren't just about miracles or tricks. They're windows into the minds of people who lived in a universe brimming with unseen forces. Some of these tales will leave you in awe, others might make you skeptical, but every single one holds a clue to understanding how magic shaped empires, toppled kings, and even altered the course of history itself. So why do these stories still grip us centuries later? Maybe it's because they tap into something deeper, the part of us that still yearns for wonder in a world that often feels too predictable. Or maybe it's the thrill of stepping into the unknown, where the rules bend and the ordinary becomes extraordinary. Whatever the reason, one thing's certain: by the time we're done, you won't look at history or reality the same way again. Ready to uncover the secrets? Let's begin. Long before science could explain the mysteries of the mind, the ancient Greeks turned to a woman who spoke in riddles from the depths of a sacred trance, the Oracle of Delphi. Perched on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, her temple was the beating heart of the ancient world, a place where kings and commoners alike journeyed to hear prophecies whispered by the gods. But what really happened when the Pythia, as she was called, inhaled those strange vapors rising from the earth? Modern research suggests fissures beneath the temple leaked ethylene, a gas known to induce euphoria and hallucinations. Could this explain her frenzied, poetic utterances? Yet even today, scholars can't fully unravel how her predictions, often ambiguous, still steered the fate of nations with uncanny precision. Take Croesus, the fabulously wealthy king of Lydia, who famously asked whether he should invade Persia. The oracle replied that if he crossed the Halys River, a great empire would fall. Confident in his military might, Croesus marched forward only to watch his own kingdom crumble. The oracle wasn't wrong, she simply let him assume which empire would perish. This wasn't mere trickery, but a masterclass in how divine ambiguity wielded real power. Leaders from Oedipus to Alexander the Great sought her counsel, knowing her words could ignite wars or spare cities from ruin. The temple itself, adorned with the maxim, "Know thyself," was a reminder that true wisdom lay in interpreting the gods will, not just hearing it. What's most fascinating isn't whether the Pythia's visions were supernatural, but how deeply people believed in them. Her prophecies weren't just advice, they were the invisible hands that shaped laws, alliances, and even the course of philosophy. When Socrates spoke of his divine, daemonian, or inner voice, it echoed the same cultural reverence for hidden knowledge. The oracle's legacy lives on in our modern obsession with predictions, from astrology to algorithms, proof that humanity still grasps for certainty in an uncertain world. So was her power divine inspiration, geological accident, or something in between? Perhaps the answer lies in the question itself. Sometimes mystery holds more sway than certainty ever could. The skies above Fátima, Portugal, on October 13, 1917, should have been ordinary, just another autumn afternoon. But for 70,000 people gathered in a field, what happened next would become one of the most debated supernatural events in modern history. Peasants, skeptics, and journalists alike swore they saw the sun tremble, spin like a fiery wheel, and then plummet toward the earth as if the heavens themselves were unraveling. Witnesses described radiant colors painting the landscape, drenched clothes suddenly drying, and an overwhelming sense of dread or ecstasy. Even secular newspapers reported the phenomenon, with one atheist reporter famously writing, "I saw it, I cannot deny it." At the center of it all stood three shepherd children who had been claiming visions of the Virgin Mary for months, warning of miracles and prophecies that would shake the world. The Catholic Church, initially cautious, spent decades investigating before declaring the event worthy of belief in 1930. But what really occurred that day? Scientists have proposed everything from mass suggestion, a kind of collective hypnosis fueled by religious fervor, to rare atmospheric effects like sundogs or light refraction. Some point to the timing. The children predicted the miracle months in advance, down to the exact hour, leaving little room for natural explanations. Others note how the crowd's diverse backgrounds, devout believers, curious onlookers, hardened critics, all reported the same impossible spectacle. Perhaps the most haunting detail isn't the sun's dance, but the prophecies shared alongside it. The children spoke of wars, persecutions, and a bishop dressed in white falling under gunfire, a detail some later linked to the attempted assassination of Pope John Paul II in 1981. Whether divine intervention or a psychological perfect storm, Fátima's miracle endures because it forces us to confront the limits of human perception. In a world where cameras document everything, here was an event witnessed by thousands yet forever just beyond the reach of proof. That tension between faith and fact, vision and reality, is what keeps Fátima alive in our imagination. It asks us not just what we believe, but how we explain the unexplainable when faced with something beyond our understanding. The night before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in the year 312, history itself seemed to hold its breath. Constantine, a Roman general locked in a brutal civil war, claimed to see a blazing symbol in the sky, the Chi-Rho, the first two letters of Christ's name in Greek, alongside the words, "In this sign conquer." What happened next would alter the course of Western civilization. He ordered his soldiers to paint the symbol on their shields, and against all odds, his outnumbered forces crushed the army of Maxentius, sending his rival plunging into the Tiber River to drown beneath the weight of his own armor. This moment didn't just secure Constantine's rule, it marked the beginning of Christianity's rise from persecuted sect to imperial religion. But was this truly a divine vision or something far more calculated? Ancient sources give us tantalizing, contradictory clues. Eusebius, Constantine's biographer, wrote decades later that the emperor described a dream where Christ himself appeared with the symbol. Yet earlier accounts, like those by the historian Lactantius, mention only a dream urging Constantine to adorn his troops with the heavenly sign of God, with no mention of flashing lights or celestial visions. The gap between these versions raises eyebrows. Did the story grow grander over time, reshaped by a regime eager to legitimize its conversion narrative? Some scholars point to Constantine's lifelong habit of blending solar worship with Christian imagery. Note how the Chi-Rho resembles a stylized sun, echoing his earlier devotion to the sun god Sol Invictus. Could his vision have been less about revelation and more about unifying his troops under a symbol that bridged old and new beliefs? Then there's the battlefield itself. The Milvian Bridge was a choke point, its narrow arches forcing Maxentius's forces into chaos, a tactical advantage Constantine's generals likely foresaw. Add the morale boost of carrying sacred symbols into battle, and the victory starts to look less like a miracle and more like a masterstroke of psychological warfare. But here's what's fascinating. Even if the vision was political theater, its impact was undeniably real. Within months, Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, ending the persecution of Christians and returning confiscated property to the church. By the time of his death, he'd commissioned grand basilicas and hosted the Council of Nicaea, shaping Christian doctrine for centuries to come. This is where history and mystery entwine. Whether divine or devised, Constantine's vision reveals how belief can be a weapon as sharp as any sword. It asks us whether the origins of faith matter as much as the actions they inspire, and how easily the line between revelation and strategy can blur when power and piety collide. Perhaps the most enduring lesson of the Milvian Bridge isn't about what Constantine saw, but what millions chose to see in him, a ruler touched by the divine, his victory proof that heaven itself had taken sides. Every year on the eve of Orthodox Easter, a hush falls over Jerusalem's Church of the Holy Sepulchre, a place believers hold as the site of Christ's crucifixion and resurrection. Thousands cram into the ancient chapel, their faces tense with anticipation, as the Greek Orthodox Patriarch enters the small edicule built over what's said to be Jesus' tomb. Then something extraordinary happens. A flicker of blue fire dances from the marble slab, a flame pilgrims call the Holy Light. For over 12 centuries, this phenomenon has defied explanation, with witnesses describing how the fire doesn't burn skin in its first miraculous moments, how it crackles with an unearthly coolness, and how it spreads through the crowd like a wave of divine energy. But what's behind this spectacle? Skeptics have long questioned the ceremony, pointing to hidden oil lamps or chemical preparations on the Patriarch's candle. In 2005, a Russian physicist claimed to detect electrodes near the tomb, suggesting human engineering, yet no definitive proof has ever surfaced. Meanwhile, devotees recount baffling details, how the flame sometimes ignites spontaneously before the Patriarch arrives, or how those who doubt its sanctity claim to feel searing heat, while believers describe only warmth. One Armenian priest's manuscript from the year 1200 even tells of a year when the fire failed to appear until a repentant sinner prayed in the crowd, a story that reinforces the idea this isn't just about flame but faith. The most striking accounts come from pilgrims who swear their burns healed within hours. In 1934, a British traveler documented seeing a man's singed beard regrow by morning. Modern visitors still report blisters vanishing without scars, though scientists argue these could be psychosomatic or minor injuries exaggerated by religious euphoria. Yet the fire's cultural weight is undeniable. For Eastern Orthodox Christians, it's not just a symbol but a living miracle echoing the resurrection itself. When the flame is flown to Greece or Russia in special lanterns, crowds greet it as if it carries a piece of the divine. Perhaps the real mystery isn't whether the holy fire obeys natural laws, but why it endures in an age of satellites and microscopes. In a world hungry for tangible proof of the sacred, this flickering blue light offers something science can't fully dissect, a moment where belief transcends doubt, where history and wonder collide in a darkened tomb. Whether miracle or masterpiece of tradition, one thing's certain: the holy fire doesn't just illuminate the church, it illuminates the human heart's unending quest for the miraculous. The story of Moses raising his staff to part the Red Sea isn't just a cornerstone of faith, it's a puzzle that bridges ancient scripture and modern science. Imagine the scene, an entire nation trapped between Pharaoh's chariots and the churning waters, when suddenly a wind sent by God divides the sea, creating walls of water so the Israelites can cross on dry ground. For centuries, this moment was seen as pure miracle, but recent geological discoveries suggest nature might have played a role in this divine drama. Researchers have pinpointed a phenomenon called wind set-down, where sustained hurricane-force winds can push shallow waters aside, exposing land beneath. Simulations show that a strong easterly wind blowing for 12 hours near the Nile Delta, exactly where the Bible places the crossing, could have created a temporary land bridge wide enough for people to cross, with waters collapsing back once the wind ceased. Then there's the matter of the 10 plagues, each more terrifying than the last. Rivers turning to blood, swarms of locusts, darkness covering the land. What if these weren't arbitrary acts of divine wrath, but a chain reaction triggered by natural disasters? Volcanologists point to the eruption of Thera, a massive volcano on Santorini around 1600 BCE, as a possible catalyst. Ashfall could have poisoned the Nile, killing fish and turning waters reddish, explaining the first plague. Acidic rain might have driven frogs from the riverbanks, only for them to die en masse, attracting lice and flies. Livestock deaths could have stemmed from toxic grazing, while hail and locusts align with post-eruption climate disruptions. Even the 3 days of darkness fits. Volcanic ash clouds can blot out the sun for weeks, but here's where it gets fascinating. The Bible insists these events were orchestrated by Moses' staff, a simple wooden rod that became a conduit for God's power. Was it truly magic or a symbolic focus for forces already at work? Ancient Near Eastern cultures saw staffs as emblems of authority, tools through which gods or kings manifested will. Egyptian magicians, after all, claimed to replicate Moses' early miracles with their own rods, suggesting a shared belief in objects channeling supernatural energy. Whether the staff sparked the plagues or simply heralded them, its presence transformed natural phenomena into acts of divine intervention, bending history toward liberation. This duality, natural disaster and sacred sign, doesn't diminish the story's power. If anything, it deepens it. The real miracle might not be the parting of the sea or the falling hail, but the timing, a people desperate for freedom, a leader who seized the moment, and a sequence of events so precise they felt orchestrated. Science can explain the how, but the why, the unshakable belief that these forces served a higher purpose, remains the province of faith. After all, whether by wind or divine hand, the result was the same: a slave nation walking through the impossible toward a new destiny. And that's the kind of magic no eruption or equation can fully unravel. In the shadowed halls of ancient Egypt, where the Nile's lifeblood met the desert's silence, a story unfolded that would echo through millennia: the resurrection of Osiris. Murdered by his jealous brother Set, the god-king was torn into 14 pieces and scattered across the land, his throne stolen, his legacy seemingly erased. But his sister-wife Isis refused to let death have the final word. With relentless devotion, she gathered every fragment of his broken body, stitching him back together with linen bandages and incantations so potent they pulsed with the rhythm of the universe itself. This wasn't just a myth, it was a map of the Egyptian soul, where magic and nature intertwined like the Nile's serpentine currents. The tale's brilliance lies in how it mirrors the land that birthed it. Every year, the Nile flooded, its waters receding to leave behind fertile soil, a cycle of death and rebirth as predictable as the stars. Osiris, god of the underworld and vegetation, embodied this duality. His dismemberment mirrored the drought's parched devastation, his resurrection, the flood's life-giving return. Priests reenacted this drama in secret temple rites, wrapping effigies of Osiris in Nile mud and barley seeds that sprouted within days, a living metaphor for renewal. The so-called Osiris beds, found in tombs, weren't mere decorations. They were magical conduits, ensuring the deceased would rise as Osiris had, triumphant over oblivion. Central to these rituals stood the Djed pillar, a hieroglyph resembling a spine, often called the backbone of Osiris. During festivals, priests would raise it ceremonially, chanting spells to restore the god's strength, and by extension, the kingdom's stability. The act wasn't symbolic theater, it was cosmic maintenance, a belief that human ritual could literally uphold divine order. Even pharaohs embraced this magic, their coronations mirroring Osiris's restoration to assert their rightful place in the celestial hierarchy. What's startling is how these ideas rippled far beyond Egypt's borders. The Greeks linked Osiris to Dionysus, another god torn apart and reborn. Early Christian writers, whether consciously or not, echoed Isis's mourning in the Virgin Mary's Lamentations. The very concept of a dying and rising deity, a savior who defeats death, finds one of its earliest expressions here. Scholars debate whether this was cultural diffusion or universal human longing, but the parallels are undeniable. Yet Egyptian magic wasn't about blind faith, it was precision. Spells from the pyramid texts detail exactly how to reassemble Osiris's limbs, each incantation a thread in the tapestry of resurrection. Even the god's missing phallus, swallowed by a fish, was replaced with gold, a blend of mythic poetry and pragmatic ritualism. This wasn't fantasy, it was technology of the sacred, a system where words and gestures could reassemble shattered divinity. Perhaps that's why Osiris endures. In a world still haunted by loss, his story whispers that fragmentation isn't final. Whether through literal belief or metaphor, we cling to the idea that what's broken can be made whole, that death in some form can be outwitted. The Nile's floods have been tamed by modern dams, but the human heart still beats to Osiris's rhythm. The hope that after the drought comes the flood, after the scattering, the gathering, and after the night, a dawn that's more than just light, it's resurrection. In the golden dusk of ancient Sri Lanka, witnesses swore they saw the impossible sacred relics of the Buddha, cradled in silk and gold, rising weightlessly into the air during their enshrinement. These weren't just fleeting glimpses. The Mahavamsa, a 5th century chronicle, describes how the relics hovered above the crowd before settling into their stupa as if guided by invisible hands. Half a world away, Tibetan monks tell nearly identical stories of meditation masters levitating precious artifacts during rituals, their bodies still in deep trance. Could these accounts be mere coincidence, or do they point to a forgotten thread of sacred technology? Modern science offers a tantalizing clue: acoustic levitation. In labs today, scientists use precisely tuned sound waves to suspend tiny objects midair, a phenomenon called sonic tweezers. High-frequency vibrations create pressure nodes that counteract gravity, making droplets of water or even small insects float eerily still. While current technology can't lift anything as large as a relic, researchers admit ancient cultures might have stumbled upon principles we're only now rediscovering. The Sri Lankan texts speak of chanting monks encircling the relics. Could rhythmic vocal harmonics, amplified by temple acoustics, have generated a crude form of levitation? Then there's the matter of intent. In Buddhist tradition, relics aren't just bones or ashes. They're infused with the Buddha's spiritual energy, said to respond to pure devotion. Tibetan lore describes advanced yogis who, through decades of meditation, could allegedly manipulate matter with mind alone. Skeptics dismiss these claims as myth, but even hardened researchers note how extreme mental focus can produce measurable physical effects. Think of monks raising their body temperature through tummo breathing or slowing their heart rates to near undetectable levels. If consciousness can bend biology, might it also briefly defy physics under extraordinary conditions? The relics themselves add another layer of intrigue. Many were enshrined in wish-fulfilling gemstones or metals like gold, substances modern science confirms can vibrate at specific frequencies. Ancient architects often designed stupas with mathematical precision, their domes acting as resonators. Pair that with the right mantra, a Sanskrit syllable like Om, whose vibrations align with the universe's fundamental frequency, and suddenly the line between prayer and physics blurs. Perhaps the most compelling detail comes from eyewitness accounts. Both Sri Lankan and Tibetan sources emphasize that levitation occurred only during moments of collective ecstasy, when hundreds of devotees reached a state of unified focus. Modern experiments show that synchronized brainwaves in groups can create palpable energy fields, a phenomenon some compare to superconductivity, where materials lose all resistance under perfect harmony. Was the real miracle not the floating relics, but the human capacity to momentarily align with forces beyond ordinary perception? Whether explained by sound, consciousness, or something beyond our current understanding, these stories endure because they challenge the boundaries of the possible. They remind us that history's greatest mysteries often lie not in choosing between science and spirituality, but in questioning what both might have missed and what wonders might still await when we dare to listen, not just with ears but with the whole of our being. Desperate men do desperate things, and few biblical figures embody this truth like King Saul on the eve of his final battle. With the Philistine army massing against him and God silent to his prayers, the once mighty ruler did the unthinkable. He sought out the Witch of Endor, a shadowy figure known for channeling the dead. Disguised and trembling, Saul begged her to summon the spirit of Samuel, the prophet who had anointed him years before. What happened next chills readers even today. An aged figure wrapped in a robe rose from the earth, his voice thick with divine wrath as he foretold Saul's imminent doom. This wasn't just a ghost story, it was a theological bombshell, a moment where the Bible's strict ban on necromancy collided with its own account of the supernatural. Archaeology sheds eerie light on why this tale was so scandalous. Excavations across ancient canon revealed terracotta figurines and inscribed bowls used to commune with ancestors, proof that necromancy wasn't just folklore but a thriving underground practice. A 9th century BC amulet found at Ketef Hinnom even bears a spell to bind the dead for divination. For Saul, a king who'd purged mediums from Israel, to secretly seek one out wasn't just hypocrisy. It was treason against the very covenant he'd sworn to uphold. The text emphasizes his terror by noting the witch herself screamed when Samuel appeared, suggesting even she didn't expect real results. What makes this seance unique is its moral ambiguity. Unlike later tales where mediums are frauds, here the magic works. Samuel's prophecy comes true word for word. Saul and his sons perish the next day. This forces us to grapple with a disturbing question. If necromancy is forbidden, why did God allow Samuel's true message to come through? Some rabbinic traditions argue the spirit was a demon impersonating the prophet, while early Christian writers saw it as a special dispensation, God bending his own rules to confront Saul one last time. The story's power lies in its refusal to tidy up the paradox. Sometimes the divine speaks through channels it explicitly condemns, leaving us to wrestle with the contradiction. Modern readers might miss the tale's deepest irony. Saul's tragedy wasn't just consulting a medium, it was his failure to recognize he'd had access to divine guidance all along. The same God who rejected him for disobedience could have answered if Saul had repented. Instead, he sought shortcuts in the shadows, trading sacred connection for illicit spectacle. In that light, the Witch of Endor isn't just a spooky interlude. She's a mirror held up to every soul that prioritizes power over principle, that seeks answers anywhere but within. The story whispers that the true magic wasn't in the seance, but in the covenant Saul abandoned, and that's a warning as potent today as it was 3,000 years ago. Among the swirling mists of Mesoamerican myth, few stories shimmer as strangely as the birth of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god, said to have sprung from the womb of a virgin goddess named Chimalman. According to the 16th century Telleriano Remensis Codex, she conceived when she swallowed an emerald dropped from the heavens, a divine spark that grew into the plumed deity who would later shape humankind from his own blood and maize. This wasn't just poetic flourish, it was a theological earthquake echoing across continents. Half a world away, across oceans the ancient Aztecs never sailed. Similar tales bubbled up: Hindu texts describing Krishna's virgin birth from Devaki, Egyptian murals showing Horus emerging from Isis's miraculous conception, even the Greek Perseus born when golden rain touched Dana's lap. How could cultures separated by millennia and geography conjure such uncannily parallel stories? The answer might lie in the stars, literally. Quetzalcoatl wasn't just a god, he was Venus, the morning and evening star, whose cyclical disappearance and reappearance mirrored themes of death and rebirth. The Telleriano Remensis depicts him as a serpent soaring from a celestial mouth, his body coiled like the planet's looping path across the sky. For Mesoamerican astronomers, Venus wasn't a distant rock but a living entity, its 8-year cycles dictating sacred calendars and coronation dates. When the codex shows Chimilman swallowing the emerald, a stone later associated with Venus in Aztec lore, it's likely encoding celestial events, perhaps a rare conjunction where Venus appeared to enter a constellation associated with maidenhood. Zoom in on the birth scene symbolism and deeper patterns emerge. The emerald mirrors the green Quetzal feathers adorning the god's serpent form, linking him to both earthly fertility and celestial motion. Unlike chaotic deities like Tezcatlipoca, Quetzalcoatl's virgin birth marked him as pure, untainted by ordinary creation's messiness, a theme mirrored in Christianity's Immaculate Conception. Even the method of conception aligns oddly with global motifs. The swallowed object recalls Greek myths where gods are conceived by eating transformed deities, while the emerald's divine origin parallels Buddhist jade birth legends. But here's where Mesoamerican thought diverges. Unlike passive virgin mothers in many traditions, Chimilman actively participates in her destiny. She isn't visited by a god in disguise or overshadowed by divine force. She chooses to ingest the emerald, owning her role in cosmic creation. This agency reflects gender dynamics in Aztec spirituality, where goddesses like Coatlicue wielded fearsome power. The codex reinforces this by showing Chimilman standing upright during birth, her posture defiant compared to the reclining Madonnas of European art. Modern scholars still debate whether these parallels prove cultural contact or shared human psychology. Jung might call it an archetype, the virgin birth as collective unconscious, while diffusionists point to possible pre-Columbian transoceanic voyages. But perhaps the truth lies in how celestial phenomena imprint on human imagination. Venus's brilliance, its rhythmic returns, its duality as both morning and evening star, it's a natural metaphor for renewal, for life emerging from seeming emptiness. When Quetzalcoatl's worshippers saw the planet vanish behind the sun only to reappear, they didn't just witness astronomy. They saw divinity being born again, and in that light, all miracles become possible, even a virgin swallowing the sky's green fire to birth a feathered god. Twice, the Mongol Empire launched the largest naval invasions the world had ever seen, and twice, their fleets were obliterated by storms so fierce, they entered legend as the kamikaze, the divine wind. In 1281, Kublai Khan's armada of nearly 4,000 ships, carrying over 140,000 soldiers, bore down on Japan like a tidal wave of iron and ambition. The samurai defending Hakata Bay fought desperately, but the real savior came from the skies, a typhoon of unimaginable fury that shattered the invasion force, drowning countless warriors and scattering their broken vessels across the seafloor. When the Mongols returned 7 years later with an even larger fleet, history repeated itself. Another tempest rose as if summoned, crushing their ambitions beneath the waves. To the Japanese, these weren't just storms, they were the kami, the Shinto gods, breathing their wrath into the winds to protect the sacred islands. Archaeology tells a more nuanced but no less astonishing story. Divers exploring the waters near Takashima Island have uncovered Mongol anchors the size of cars, ceramic bombs filled with gunpowder, an early form of naval artillery, and skeletons still clad in lamellar armor. These wrecks reveal the invaders' technological edge. Their ships were bulkier, slower, and dangerously overcrowded compared to Japan's agile coastal vessels. When the typhoons hit, the Mongol fleets had no room to maneuver, their troops packed like sardines below decks. Nature didn't just attack, it exploited their strategic blunders. Yet what's fascinating isn't just the destruction, but how Japan interpreted it. The priests of Ai's grand shrine, dedicated to the sun goddess Amaterasu, declared the storms proof of her covenant with the imperial family, a belief enshrined in the iconic, illustrated account of the Mongol invasion scrolls where golden kami ride the clouds, hurling lightning at foreign ships. This birthed the idea of Shinkoku Japan as a divine nation under celestial protection, a concept that would echo through centuries. Emperor Go-Daigo later used it to justify overthrowing the Kamakura shogunate, while World War II propagandists resurrected the term kamikaze for suicide pilots, twisting a myth of deliverance into one of sacrifice. Modern scholars note how the typhoons coincided with peak monsoon seasons, suggesting the Mongols ignored local knowledge at their peril. But for Japan, the lesson was clear. Their islands weren't just land, they were a spiritual fortress, their destiny written in the stars and the storms. Today, the divine wind's legacy is a study in contrasts. At Hakazaki Shrine in Fukuoka, priests still perform rituals thanking the kami for their 13th century intervention, while historians pore over ship timbers to understand how climate and warfare intersect. The kamikaze weren't just whether they were the moment Japan's identity crystallized, a reminder that sometimes the line between history and heaven is as thin as the crest of a wave. In the heart of Rome, where marble gods loomed over bustling forums, some statues did more than stand in silent grandeur. They spoke. The colossal statue of Memnon, an Egyptian pharaoh reimagined as a Greek hero, was said to sing at dawn, its voice ringing clear as a bell when sunlight touched its weathered lips. Emperor Hadrian himself made the journey to hear it during his tour of Egypt in the year 130, and when the statue remained silent on his first visit, court poets recorded how it miraculously found its voice the next morning, as if greeting the ruler personally. What really stirred this ancient marvel to speech? Archaeologists have since discovered the secret, a network of hidden tubes and chambers within the statue, where priests could project voices or direct steam to mimic supernatural sounds. Yet, even knowing the mechanics, we're left with a deeper question: why did Rome's most powerful leaders, men who commanded armies and built cities, kneel before what they knew might be stagecraft? The answer lies in the Roman obsession with prodigious strange occurrences believed to herald divine messages. Before disasters like the eruption of Vesuvius or the Great Fire of Rome, chroniclers reported statues sweating blood or weeping tears of bronze. Pliny the Younger described how a statue of Fortuna in Antium dripped with moisture days before a devastating earthquake, while Tacitus noted how the gods in Capitolinus' temple trembled hours before assassins struck down emperors. These weren't dismissed as coincidence, they were urgent omens, triggering state-funded sacrifices and frantic consultations with the Sibylline books, Rome's ancient scrolls of prophecy. Modern geologists suggest some sweating statues could have been porous stone reacting to seismic vibrations or humidity shifts. But for the Romans, the line between natural and supernatural was thin as a shadow. Even more fascinating were the political calculations behind these miracles. When Hadrian's beloved Antinous drowned in the Nile, the emperor didn't just mourn, he declared the young man a god, commissioning statues across the empire that spoke through hidden priests to endorse Hadrian's rule. One such statue in Athens allegedly whispered prophecies supporting his unpopular reforms, lending celestial weight to earthly policies. This wasn't mere deception, it was theater of the divine, where rulers and priests collaborated to shape belief. The skeptic Lucian mocked how Memnon's song suspiciously stopped once bribes to the local priests dried up, yet for every cynic, thousands still pilgrimaged, desperate for a sign that gods walked among them. Perhaps the real magic wasn't in the statues, but in what they revealed about human nature. In a world without satellites or seismographs, people sought meaning in the tremor of marble, the groan of bronze. When a statue spoke, it wasn't just sound, it was the voice of uncertainty itself, a reminder that even emperors couldn't control fate. Today, we'd call it confirmation bias or acoustics, but strip away the labels and the longing remains, to hear something greater than ourselves echo through the ages, whether from a god's lips or the hollow throat of a stone giant. The statues may have been clever fakes, but the awe they inspired, that was as real as the ground beneath Rome's feet. Deep in the mists of Welsh mythology, a cauldron bubbled with power, not to brew potions but to resurrect the dead. The Per Dadani, as it was called, could bring slain warriors back to life with a single drop of its enchanted water. Centuries later, that same mystical vessel would transform into something even more legendary. The Holy Grail, the cup said to have caught Christ's blood at the crucifixion and later dazzled King Arthur's knights with promises of immortality. But how did a pagan artifact become Christianity's most sought-after relic? The answer lies in the tangled web of medieval Europe, where old magic refused to die. It simply put on a new coat of sacred paint. The Grail's evolution is a masterclass in cultural borrowing. Early Welsh texts like the Mabinogion describe cauldrons that never empty, gifts from the underworld that sustain heroes indefinitely. When Chrétien de Troyes penned the first Arthurian Grail romance in the 12th century, he fused these Celtic myths with Christian symbolism, creating a vessel that wasn't just magical, it was divine. His Percival describes the Grail radiating light so intense it dimmed the candles around it, carried by a maiden through a castle where time itself seemed fractured. Later versions, like Wolfram von Eschenbach's Parzival, went further, claiming the Grail could summon any food desired and was guarded by Templar-like knights called the Grail Keepers. Here's where history blurs into legend. The real Knights Templar were indeed rumored to possess a sacred cup dug from Jerusalem's ruins, fueling theories that they'd found the Grail beneath Solomon's temple. Then there's the Valencia chalice, a simple agate cup displayed in Spain's Cathedral of Valencia, believed by some to be the Grail itself. Carbon dating places its origin between the 4th century BCE and the 1st century CE, fitting the biblical timeline. Pilgrims report experiencing sudden healings near it, while medieval texts describe its eerie properties. Water left in it overnight allegedly glowed faintly, and those who drank from it claimed renewed vitality. Modern physicists have floated theories about trace radiation from its materials, agate and gold, possibly emitting low-level energy, though no studies confirm miraculous effects. Still, the Vatican has officially endorsed it as a venerated relic, stopping short of declaring it the true Grail but acknowledging its spiritual significance. What's most compelling isn't whether the Grail exists, but why its legend persists. From Celtic cauldrons to Templar treasures, it represents humanity's oldest obsession, cheating death. In the Quest del Saint Graal, only the purest knight, Galahad, could gaze into the cup's depths and ascend to heaven, implying the Grail wasn't just an object but a test of the soul. Today, that idea lives on in pop culture, from Indiana Jones to Dan Brown, proving some magic doesn't fade. Whether sacred vessel or psychological mirror, the Grail's real power may be its refusal to be found, keeping our longing for the eternal forever just out of reach. The summer of 1518 in Strasbourg was supposed to be ordinary until the dancing began. It started with one woman, Frau Trophia, stepping into the cobbled square and moving as if her limbs had a mind of their own. Within days, 36 others joined her, their bodies convulsing in endless, erratic motions. By month's end, nearly 400 people were caught in the frenzy, dancing until their feet bled, some collapsing from exhaustion or even heart attacks. Authorities scrambled for answers, convinced this was divine retribution for the city's sins. Priests ordered more dancing, believing only exhaustion could purge the curse, while musicians played pipes and drums to keep the afflicted moving, a macabre prescription that only worsened the epidemic. Modern medicine offers chilling alternatives. One leading theory points to ergot poisoning, a fungal infection on rye bread that produces chemicals similar to LSD. In small doses, it causes hallucinations and muscle spasms, in large ones, gangrene and death. But historians note gaps in this explanation. Why did only dancing manifest, and why did it spread socially rather than through contaminated food? That's where mass psychogenic illness enters the picture, a phenomenon where stress and shared belief trigger physical symptoms. Strasbourg had been ravaged by famine, disease, and religious tensions, creating a pressure cooker of collective trauma. When Trophia danced, her motions became a subconscious release valve, a contagious language of despair. The deeper mystery lies in how medieval and modern explanations aren't as opposed as they seem. The townsfolk saw demons, we see dopamine misfires. Both frameworks acknowledge an invisible force hijacking the body, whether supernatural or neurological. Even the cures mirror each other. Priests prescribed rhythmic music, a primitive form of music therapy now used to regulate nervous systems. What we dismiss as superstition might have been intuitive grasp of psychosomatic healing. Perhaps the true lesson of Strasbourg isn't about diagnosing the past, but humility in the present. We still have our own dancing plagues, viral TikTok challenges, flash mobs, even crowd crushes at concerts. The methods change, but the human susceptibility to collective trance remains. In that light, the 1518 outbreak isn't just a medical oddity. It's a mirror held up to our own fragility, proof that under the right conditions, any of us might find ourselves moving to a rhythm we never chose. For over 1,000 years, whispers swirled through ancient Greece about what truly happened inside the hall of initiation at Eleusis. The Eleusinian mysteries, sacred rites dedicated to Demeter and Persephone, promised initiates a blissful afterlife, but the price was silence. Those who underwent the rituals, from philosophers like Plato to emperors like Hadrian, took their secrets to the grave. What dark magic or divine vision compelled such unwavering secrecy? Clues suggest a potent blend of theater, psychedelics, and raw psychological power unlike anything the ancient world had ever seen. Every autumn, thousands made the 14-mile pilgrimage from Athens to Eleusis, leaving behind all weapons and status. The rites began with a reenactment of Persephone's abduction, participants plunging into darkness as priests wailed, simulating her descent into Hades. Then came the climax, drinking kykeon, a barley potion scholars now believe contained ergot, the same fungus implicated in the dancing plagues. Unlike uncontrolled exposure, however, Eleusis's priests likely mastered precise dosing, crafting an experience that blurred agony and ecstasy. Initiates described seeing the sun at midnight, a classic hallucinogenic effect where sensory boundaries dissolve. One account speaks of a blinding light revealing the sacred objects, possibly sheaves of wheat symbolizing life's cyclical rebirth, a vision so profound Cicero called it humanity's greatest gift. But why did even free thinkers like Socrates refuse to break their vows? The punishment for disclosure was death, yet the terror went deeper. The mysteries didn't just promise knowledge, they engineered revelation through sensory overload. Imagine passing through the Telesterians' labyrinthine corridors, torchlight flickering on walls painted with chthonic horrors, priests' voices echoing in antiphonal chants, the air thick with incense and the metallic tang of kykeon. This wasn't mere ceremony, it was psychological alchemy, transforming dread into catharsis. By confronting symbolic death, initiates emerged believing they'd unlocked eternity. Modern excavations reveal the hall's ingenious design, a grid of pillars creating shadow play illusions, and a central anactoron inner sanctum where hidden priests may have projected divine voices. The real magic wasn't supernatural, it was the understanding that belief, when staged with precision, could rewrite reality itself. That's why Plato, who questioned every Athenian tradition, never mocked Eleusis. He knew some truths aren't spoken, they're felt in the bones, in the way a single night under that vaulted roof could make mortality taste less like an end and more like a door swinging open. Tucked away in Naples Cathedral, a small glass vial holds a substance that defies explanation: the dried blood of Saint Januarius, a 4th century martyr. For over 600 years, this dark powder has performed a miracle 3 times annually, liquefying before the eyes of pilgrims as priests chant prayers and tilt the reliquary. Scientists who have analyzed samples call it a thixotropic gel, a substance that liquefies when agitated like ketchup flowing after a tap. Yet even chemistry can't explain why this particular sample responds on schedule, why it sometimes bubbles and changes color, or why its failures have eerily predicted some of Naples' darkest hours. The ritual follows an exact script. On feast days, the archbishop displays the vial to crowds cramming the Duomo, turning it slowly as the faithful shout prayers. When liquefaction occurs, sometimes instantly, sometimes after hours, a cheer erupts as the presiding priest announces, "Il miracolo igro fatto." Records show the blood remained solid in 1944 as Allied bombs rained on Naples, and again in 1980 before a devastating earthquake killed 3,000. Even atheists pause when the substance stubbornly stays clotted. Locals whisper, "San Gennaro igro arrabbiato," the saint is angry. Laboratory tests add layers to the mystery. In 1991, a team using infrared spectroscopy confirmed the vial contains hemoglobin, suggesting real blood. But how does a biological sample remain chemically active after 16 centuries? Some propose the priests secretly replace it, though the vial's medieval seals appear intact. Others note the ritual's precise motions might trigger the thixotropic effect, yet identical handling on non-feast days fails to produce results. The most haunting accounts come from witnesses who swear the substance swells in volume during liquefaction, as if drawing energy from the air itself. Perhaps the blood's true power lies beyond science. For Neapolitans, it's a covenant, a promise their patron saint hasn't abandoned them. When the blood flows, hope flows with it. When it clumps, the city braces. This isn't just chemistry or theology, but something deeper. The alchemy where faith and fear meet, where a vial of ancient dust becomes the heartbeat of an entire civilization. Whether miracle or marvel, one truth remains: some mysteries refuse to be solved, and perhaps we're richer for it. No artifact has inspired more awe or terror than the Ark of the Covenant. Described in the Bible as a gold-plated chest carrying the stone tablets of Moses, it wasn't just a relic, it was a weapon. When the Israelites crossed the Jordan, priests bearing the Ark stepped into the waters, and the river reportedly split like the Red Sea. At the Battle of Jericho, 7 circuits around the city walls with the Ark unleashed a shockwave that crumbled stone. And when the Philistines captured it, plagues ravaged their cities until they returned it on a cart pulled by runaway cows. These aren't just miracles, they're shockingly specific effects that some researchers believe point to a real, if lost, technology. One startling theory comes from electrical engineer Harry Oldfield, who proposed the Ark functioned as an ancient capacitor. Its design, gold layers separated by acacia wood, matches basic capacitor principles, where insulating material between conductive surfaces stores charge. The Ark's poles allowed transport without direct contact, while its lid, the mercy seat, featured 2 cherubim with outstretched wings, perfect discharge points. Oldfield suggests the Ark could accumulate static from desert winds or ritual friction, priests' linen robes dragging on sand, releasing bursts powerful enough to stun or kill. Even biblical warnings about unauthorized touching align with high-voltage hazards. When a man named Uzzah steadied the Ark during transport, he was struck dead instantly, his body possibly frozen by current. Yet the Ark's story takes a stranger turn in Ethiopia, where the Kebra Nagast, a 14th century text, claims it never vanished but was spirited away by Menelik, son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. To this day, priests in Aksum guard what they swear is the true Ark in a chapel where only its caretaker may enter. Samples of the chapel's walls show higher radiation levels than surrounding areas, fueling speculation about an enshrined radioactive object. Whether divine or dangerous, the Ark's legacy persists in customs like the Ethiopian Tabot replicas of the Ark's lid carried in processions to bless fields, echoing its ancient role as a conduit between heaven and earth. Perhaps the most haunting clue lies in what happened when the Ark wasn't used as intended. after David brought it to Jerusalem, his successor Solomon built the first temple as its permanent home, a structure designed with precise dimensions to house God's presence. But when Babylon sacked Jerusalem in 586 BCE, the Ark vanished from history. Some rabbinic texts hint it was hidden beneath the Temple Mount, others say angels reclaimed it. What's undeniable is that its absence marked a shift from a faith where divinity blazed visibly in fire and thunder to one where God spoke in whispers and scrolls. The Ark wasn't just lost, it was the last tangible thread to an era when magic and miracle weren't metaphor but matter. And that's why we still search, not just for a golden box, but for the moment when the sacred reached out and touched the world with fingers of flame. Deep in the jagged cliffs of Mount Hira, a 40-year-old merchant named Muhammad sought solitude, retreating to a narrow cave to meditate for days at a time. It was here, in the year 610, that the unlettered man, later revered by billions as Islam's final prophet, would experience something that defies simple explanation. According to Islamic tradition, the angel Gabriel seized Muhammad in a crushing embrace, commanding him to recite. Though he protested he couldn't read, the words poured through him, verses of such linguistic brilliance they would become the opening lines of the Quran, a text that would reshape continents. But what actually transpired in that suffocating darkness, the answer depends on who you ask and how you define revelation. Modern neurology offers a provocative lens. Muhammad's symptoms: sudden overwhelming pressure, visions of light, hearing voices indistinguishable from external sound, mirror temporal lobe epilepsy's mystical aura. Neurologists note how seizures in this brain region can trigger hyper-religiosity, a well-documented phenomenon where patients describe encounters with divine beings or transcendent truths. Case studies reveal strikingly similar accounts. A Norwegian woman who believed Odin spoke to her during episodes, or a Kentucky trucker who swore angels guided his hands mid-seizure to write scripture. Even the Quran's description of revelation as something cast into the heart aligns with how temporal lobe activity can manifest as implanted thoughts. Yet here's where the mystery deepens. The Quran's linguistic structure defies epileptic explanation. Its Arabic employs a dizzying array of literary devices: chiasmus, ring composition, intricate phonetics, with mathematical precision unseen in 7th century literature. Linguistic analysis shows its verses follow a unique, non-human rhythm. Where classical Arabic poetry relied on predictable meters, the Quran's cadence shifts unpredictably yet harmoniously, like a symphony with no repeating motifs. Challenge verses daring critics to produce even 3 comparable lines remain unmet after 14 centuries. Even secular scholars like Montgomery Watt acknowledge this paradox. How could a man with no formal education produce a text that revolutionized Arabic grammar overnight? The cultural context adds another layer. Pre-Islamic Arabia was a mosaic of oral poets competing in annual fairs, where linguistic virtuosity meant survival. Into this arena stepped Muhammad with revelations that didn't just exceed existing standards, they obliterated them. Surah al-Baqarah's 286 verses maintain intricate thematic threads without a single inconsistency, while its disjointed letters like Alif Lam Mim remain cryptographically unsolved. Rivals accused Muhammad of sorcery because his words didn't fit known human patterns. Perhaps the most compelling detail isn't in the text but its reception. When recitations caused hardened warriors to convert on the spot, it wasn't just the message, it was the medium. Listeners described physical reactions: hairs standing on end, uncontrollable weeping, a sensation of the words vibrating in their bones. Modern acoustic studies show the Quran's optimal resonance frequencies align with human stress reduction thresholds, suggesting its sound alone has measurable physiological effects. So was Hira Cave the birthplace of divine scripture or a neurological anomaly? The question may miss the point. What matters is how a moment of profound personal transformation, whether sparked by neurons or angels, gave rise to a linguistic and spiritual legacy that still guides over 1 billion lives today. In the end, the Quran's real miracle might not be its origin, but its enduring power to turn skepticism into awe with nothing more than syllables and ink. The courtroom in Salem Village, Massachusetts, in 1692 wasn't just a place of law, it was a theater of the invisible. When young girls writhed on the floor, shrieking that specters of their neighbors were pinching or biting them, the entire community saw not hysteria but proof of witchcraft. These weren't mere accusations, they were testimonies about a shadow world where demons and humans colluded, where the accused sent their specters to torment the innocent. No physical evidence was needed, just the chilling certainty that the devil's magic could operate beyond sight. Within months, 20 people were hanged or crushed to death, their pleas of innocence drowned out by a frenzy that blurred the line between fear and faith. This nightmare had a blueprint, the Malleus Maleficarum, a 15th century witch hunting manual that read like a twisted field guide to the supernatural. Written by a disgraced German inquisitor, it detailed how witches made pacts with demons, stole penises, storing them in nests, no less, and rode flying goats to midnight orgies. Its most insidious claim, that the devil's greatest trick was making witchcraft undetectable so only spectral evidence, the victim's visions of invisible attacks, could reveal the guilty. The book wasn't just influential, it was apocalyptic, spreading like wildfire after the printing press's invention and fueling centuries of panics from Bavaria to Salem. What's terrifying isn't just the cruelty, but the logic behind it. When Puritan minister Cotton Mather defended spectral evidence, he argued that denying it would deny the very existence of the spiritual world. In other words, to question the girl's visions was to question God himself. This created a closed loop of belief. If you doubted the accusations, you were either ignorant or in league with Satan. Modern psychology recognizes this as apophenia, the tendency to see patterns where none exist, supercharged by groupthink. Salem's judges weren't necessarily evil. They were trapped in a collective delusion where every coincidence, a cow's death, a failed crop, became a hex's smoking gun. The echoes today are unnerving. From McCarthyism's Red Scare to modern QAnon conspiracies, moral panics still thrive on invisible enemies and unverifiable claims. The Malleus's legacy isn't just a historical curiosity, it's a warning about how easily fear can weaponize imagination. Because the real magic trick wasn't specters or spells, it was convincing ordinary people that the greatest threats aren't the ones we can see, but the ones we're told to believe in. The fog of war takes on a chilling new meaning when we revisit the Battle of Mons in August 1914. British troops, outnumbered and exhausted from their first major clash with the advancing German army, began sharing eerily similar stories in the trenches, visions of phantom archers appearing in the sky, their arrows cutting down enemy soldiers with impossible precision. Some described towering, luminous figures with longbows. Others swore they saw the ghosts of knights clad in medieval armor fighting alongside them. Within weeks, rumors spread that these were the spirits of Agincourt's legendary longbowmen, or even King Arthur's knights returned from Avalon to protect England in its darkest hour. The press dubbed them the Angels of Mons, and soon the story took on a life of its own, blurring the line between battlefield trauma and something far more mysterious. Historians have long debated what really happened that day. The most straightforward explanation points to chlorine gas, a terrifying new weapon first deployed by the Germans at Ypres just months later. Early gas attacks caused vivid hallucinations, with soldiers reporting visions of spectral figures or distorted landscapes. Yet Mons occurred before widespread gas use, and the consistency of the Archer imagery across unrelated units suggests something beyond chemical confusion. Psychologists point to pareidolia, the brain's tendency to impose familiar patterns on chaos, like seeing faces in clouds. For men raised on stories of English longbowmen defeating continental armies at Crecy and Agincourt, it's no stretch to imagine their overwhelmed minds conjuring heroic ghosts. But here's where it gets fascinating. The Angels of Mons myth didn't emerge organically from the trenches. It was catalyzed by a short story. Author Arthur Machen published The Bowmen in the London Evening News that September, a fictional tale of St. George summoning spectral archers to aid British troops. Though Machen stressed his story was pure invention, exhausted soldiers and grieving families latched onto it as confirmation of divine intervention. The tale spread like wildfire, morphing with each retelling until even veterans who hadn't witnessed anything began to believe. This wasn't just collective hallucination. It was narrative alchemy where fiction blurred into lived experience under the crushing weight of war's trauma. Perhaps the most haunting aspect isn't whether the angels were real, but why they mattered. For men facing industrialized slaughter, machine guns, artillery barrages, landscapes stripped of glory, the idea of chivalric ghosts leveled the playing field. The archers symbolized a purer form of combat where skill and courage could still triumph over anonymous mechanized death. Even the choice of archers over, say, angelic cavalry is telling. Longbows were the weapon of the common man, a democratic symbol contrasting the aristocratic officer class. In this light, the visions weren't escapism, they were subconscious resistance, a way for soldiers to reclaim agency in a war that had rendered them expendable. The legacy of Mons lingers in modern military folklore. Similar sightings occurred in World War II, from pilots spotting phantom squadrons to the legendary Foo Fighters, a mysterious light-tailing aircraft. Today, neuroscientists study how extreme stress triggers temporal lobe activity, producing religious visions in everything from mountaineers to astronauts. The Angels of Mons remind us that in the crucible of war, the mind doesn't just break. It transforms, bending reality into whatever shape lets a soldier keep fighting. Whether through gas, fatigue, or sheer need, those archers became as real as the mud and blood around them. And maybe, in the end, that's what makes the story unforgettable, not because it defies explanation, but because it reveals how desperately we cling to magic when the world becomes unbearable. Hidden for centuries in the vaults of forgotten libraries, the emerald green words of Thoth's tablet promised power over heaven and earth if one could decipher them. As above, so below, declared the cryptic text, a phrase that would ignite the imaginations of alchemists, philosophers, and even one of history's greatest scientists. Legend claims the tablet was penned by Thoth, the Egyptian god of wisdom, though medieval Arabic scholars attributed it to Hermes Trismegistus, a mythical fusion of Thoth and the Greek Hermes. This wasn't just poetry, it was an operating manual for the cosmos, suggesting that the patterns of the stars mirrored the secrets of the human soul, and that by mastering one you could unravel the other. John Dee, Queen Elizabeth I's court astrologer, carried a copy of the Emerald Tablet everywhere, convinced its principles could unlock the mysteries of alchemy. His infamous Enochian magic, a language he claimed was dictated by angels, borrowed heavily from Hermetic thought, treating the universe as a vast puzzle where symbols, numbers, and celestial alignments held transformative power. Dee's experiments weren't mere superstition. They were early attempts at a grand unified theory, blending mathematics, astronomy, and mysticism into a single framework. His scrying sessions with the dubious medium Edward Kelly sought to map the angelic hierarchies described in Hermetic texts, believing these invisible forces governed everything from the tides to the transmutation of base metals into gold. But the most surprising student of the Emerald Tablet was Isaac Newton. Though celebrated for his scientific breakthroughs, Newton spent more time decoding alchemical manuscripts than writing his laws of motion. In his secret journals, he meticulously analyzed the tablet's maxims, convinced they held clues to the philosopher's stone, not just a literal substance but a key to divine knowledge. His famous prism experiments, which revealed the spectrum of light, may have been inspired by Hermetic ideas about refraction as a metaphor for spiritual illumination. For Newton, the separation of white light into colors mirrored the alchemical process of breaking down matter to reveal its purest essence. Modern occult revivals, from the Golden Dawn to contemporary chaos magic, still treat the Emerald Tablet as a foundational text. Its influence even seeps into unexpected corners Carl Jung cited, as above, so below, when describing synchronicity, the eerie alignment of inner and outer events. Silicon Valley tech gurus riff on its principles to justify everything from quantum computing to blockchain, framing code as the new alchemy. The tablet's endurance lies in its elegant duality. It's both a call to explore the universe and a reminder that the greatest discoveries often begin with looking inward. Whether divine revelation or psychological archetype, its magic endures because it speaks to the oldest human itch, the belief that if we just find the right cipher, the cosmos will whisper back. When Lord Carnarvon died just months after entering Tutankhamun's tomb in 1923, newspapers worldwide erupted with sensational headlines: the mummy's curse had struck. The timing seemed too perfect: a feverish mosquito bite, a sudden infection, and then darkness engulfing the very man who'd funded the expedition. By the time 12 others connected to the tomb's discovery had also passed under mysterious circumstances, public hysteria reached a fever pitch. But strip away the Hollywood theatrics and you'll find a far more fascinating story: how ancient Egypt's real execration rituals, spells of divine retribution, became tangled with modern obsession, microbiology, and plain old bad luck. The curse myth took root in Victorian England long before Carter's discovery. Writers like Louisa May Alcott penned tales of mummies exacting revenge, while staged unwrappings of mummies as dinner entertainment stoked morbid curiosity. Yet genuine Egyptian curses did exist, just not in the form pop culture imagines. Archaeologists have uncovered execration texts inscribed on pottery or figurines, often buried beneath temples. These weren't vague warnings, they were precise, brutal contracts with the gods. A pharaoh might inscribe the name of a rebel or foreign enemy on a clay effigy, then smash it during a ritual while priests invoked Osiris to tear out the foe's soul as his bones are broken. The magic lay in the act of writing itself. Words weren't just symbols, but vessels of power that could reach across realms when properly activated. But Tutankhamun's tomb lacked such inscriptions. So why the deaths? Modern forensics points to something far eerier than supernatural vengeance. Sealed tombs can become petri dishes of lethal microbiology. In 2013, German scientists analyzed samples from royal burial chambers and identified Aspergillus flavus, a toxic mold that thrives in darkness and attacks the lungs. For Carnarvon, already weakened by a chronic illness, a single spore-filled breath could have tipped his immune system into collapse. Even stranger, some toxins linger for millennia. Traces of natron embalming salt, mixed with organic decay, might have created airborne irritants modern excavators dubbed tomb lung. The most ironic twist: the real curse might have been human greed. Carnarvon's contract with Egypt's Antiquities Ministry granted him exclusive rights to document the find, a financial windfall that bred resentment. Rumors swirled that he'd smuggled artifacts, prompting some to speculate the curse was cover for something more earthly: sabotage. Howard Carter, who spent a decade working in the tomb, lived to 64 without supernatural interference, further debunking the myth. What the curse reveals isn't ancient malevolence, but our own obsession with poetic justice. We want to believe hubris has consequences, that disturbing the past invites retribution. In that sense, the mummy's curse endures not because it's true, but because it's a mirror, one that reflects our deepest fear that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. The fields of Domremy in 15th century France were an unlikely breeding ground for a military legend, until a teenage shepherdess named Joan began hearing voices that would rewrite history. At 13, Joan of Arc claimed the Archangel Michael, Saint Catherine, and Saint Margaret spoke to her with increasing urgency, commanding her to drive the English from French soil and crown the Dauphin Charles as king. What followed wasn't just inspiration, it was a series of battlefield miracles that defied logic. A peasant girl with no combat training accurately predicted the lifting of the siege of Orleans, guided troops to hidden fording points, and even located a long-lost sword behind the altar of a church in Fierbois, a weapon she'd never seen but described in precise detail. To her soldiers, these weren't just tactics, they were proof heaven itself had taken sides. Modern psychiatry often cites Joan as a potential case of schizophrenia or temporal lobe epilepsy, given her auditory hallucinations and visions. Neurological studies show that seizures in this brain region can produce intensely religious imagery, while schizophrenia's command hallucinations might explain her unshakable conviction. Yet this diagnosis falters when confronted with her documented strategic brilliance. At Patay, she outmaneuvered seasoned English commanders by splitting her forces to attack their vulnerable rear, a move no untrained mind could devise. Her ability to boost morale was equally uncanny. Demoralized troops transformed into fervent warriors at her mere presence, a psychological effect even Napoleon later admired. The supernatural claims grow thornier with the sword at Fierbois. Chroniclers recorded that Joan directed priests to dig exactly where the blade lay buried, though local lore claimed it had been lost for decades. Skeptics argue she might have overheard villagers discussing its location, but the church's own records noted no recent excavations. Even more baffling was her prediction of her own wounding at Orleans, a crossbow bolt to the shoulder, days before it happened, followed by her insistence on returning to the front lines despite the injury. Historians still wrestle with the divine election theory, the idea that Joan was a genuine instrument of providence. Her contemporaries, including the cynical Duke of Alençon, testified under oath that she displayed knowledge of distant events she couldn't have known, like secret disputes among French commanders. During her trial, when interrogators tried to trap her with theological questions far beyond a peasant's education, she answered with startling clarity, once telling a bishop, "You say you are my judge. Take care, for in truth I have been sent by God, and you place yourself in great danger." Perhaps the most compelling evidence lies in the aftermath. After Joan's capture and execution, Charles VII, now crowned, quietly reopened investigations into her trial. Decades later, the Church canonized her not just for piety, but for the inexplicable victories that had saved France. Whether divinely guided or psychologically extraordinary, Joan's story forces us to confront a timeless question. Does it matter where conviction comes from if it reshapes the world? In the end, her voices, real or imagined, didn't just win battles. They ignited a nation's soul, proving that sometimes the most powerful magic isn't in the heavens or the mind, but in the space between belief and action. Hanging from the world tree for 9 nights, pierced by his own spear, Odin paid the ultimate price for wisdom, not in gold or blood, but in agony. Norse legends tell how the All-Father endured this torturous ordeal to seize the runes, those ancient symbols carved into stone and bone that held the power to shape fate itself. These weren't just letters, they were living forces, whispered spells etched into weapons to ensure victory, scratched onto amulets to ward off curses, or even tattooed onto skin to channel the god's favor. The runes blurred the line between language and magic, where every stroke of the knife wasn't just writing, it was invocation. Take the Ribe skull fragment, discovered in Denmark and dating back to the 8th century. Scratched into its surface are runes spelling Ulfa wolf alongside cryptic symbols, believed to be a protective charm against evil spirits. What's startling isn't just the inscription, but its placement carved into a piece of human skull, suggesting the Vikings saw bones as conduits for power. Elsewhere, runic spells like the Björketorp monument in Sweden warn invaders with chilling precision. I foresee perdition for the one who breaks this monument. Prophecy of destruction. This wasn't poetry, it was a metaphysical booby trap, words designed to unleash calamity on trespassers. The rune's duality, both mundane and divine, reflects Viking practicality. Farmers used them to bless crops, while warriors like those at the Battle of Stiklestad relied on the Tyr rune for courage, named after the one-handed god of war. But the most potent runes demanded sacrifice, mirroring Odin's ordeal. The Edda describes how the god Heimdall, under the name Rig, taught runes to humanity, but only to those willing to undergo trials. This echoes in archaeological finds like the Oseberg ship burial, where a woman, likely a Völva Cirrus, was buried with a staff inscribed with runes, her bones showing signs of ritual scarring. Mastery of runes wasn't free, it required suffering, a transaction where pain bought power. Modern scholars still debate how rune magic worked. Were the carving psychological tools, focusing the mind like a mantra? Or did the Vikings believe the symbols literally altered reality? The answer might lie in between. Take the Alu formula found on amulets, a sequence whose meaning is lost but recurs like a magical algorithm. Like a password tapping into cosmic code, its repetition suggests the Vikings viewed language as a tuning fork, vibrating in harmony with hidden forces. Even today, runes fascinate not just as history, but as a window into a mindset where every word was a spark, and every scribe held a sliver of Odin's hard-won fire. What endures isn't just the runes themselves, but the raw ethos they embody. That true wisdom isn't given, it's torn from the universe with teeth and grit. Odin's sacrifice reminds us that magic in any age isn't about shortcuts. It's about paying the price. In a small Sicilian home in 1953, a plaster statue of the Virgin Mary began to weep real tears, not just a trickle, but a flood of liquid that soaked handkerchiefs and drew thousands of pilgrims. Laboratory tests would later confirm the substance matched human tears, complete with proteins and salts. This wasn't an isolated incident. From Japan's Akita statue dripping oily tears foretelling church persecution to a New Mexico icon weeping blood that cardiologists verified as type AB, these phenomena stretch across continents and decades, challenging both faith and science. The Catholic Church, wary of hysteria but compelled by devotion, has investigated hundreds of such claims with a mix of reverence and forensic rigor. Sometimes affirming miracles, other times exposing elaborate hoaxes. Take the case of the Akita statue in 1973. Sister Agnes Sasagawa, a deaf nun, first noticed droplets seeping from the statue's right hand, later identified as fragrant oil. Over the next 8 years, the wooden figure allegedly wept 101 times, while Sasagawa reported visions warning of global chastisement. The local bishop initially dismissed it, but when the statue's prophecies seemingly predicted the church's sexual abuse scandals decades early, Vatican investigators took notice. Unlike spontaneous cases, Akita's tears followed a precise schedule, stopping abruptly on the feast day of Our Lady of Sorrows. Skeptics point to hidden reservoirs, but the real puzzle lies in how the oil's chemical composition shifted unpredictably between samples, defying simple explanations. Then there's the darker side of these miracles. In 1985, a Calabrian statue's Tears of Blood enthralled Italy until investigators discovered hollow tubes in its eyes connected to a hidden bag of pig's blood. Similarly, a Bolivian icon hailed as Miraculous in 2001 was found to have a sponge soaked in red dye wedged behind its pupils. Forensic techniques have grown sophisticated: spectrometry to analyze fluid composition, thermal imaging to detect hidden compartments, even microscopic examination of tear ducts for tampering. Yet some cases resist debunking. The Syracuse tears, for instance, flowed upward against gravity, a phenomenon physicists still can't replicate artificially. What makes these statues endure isn't just their mystery, but their timing. They often weep during moments of crisis, wars, pandemics, schisms, as if mirroring collective anguish. When a Honduran statue shed tears during a brutal drug cartel uprising in 2012, Locals interpreted it as divine grief over violence. Psychologists call this psychometry, the tendency to imbue objects with emotional resonance. For devotees, the statues aren't crying, they're participating in human suffering, a concept rooted in Catholicism's theology of compassio, suffering with. The Church's approach is tellingly dualistic. While Lourdes and Fátima bask in official approval, most weeping statues remain in limbo, neither condemned nor fully endorsed. Pope Benedict XVI once quipped, "The real miracle is when people change, not when statues do." Yet even skeptics admit these phenomena tap into something primal, the longing for the sacred to breach the mundane, to remind us that wonder might still lurk in the corners of an otherwise explainable world. Whether crafted by human hands or something beyond, the tears flow not just from plaster and paint, but from the fault line between what we see and what we desperately hope is there. Beneath the cracking turtle shells and rustling yarrow stalks of ancient China lies one of history's most enduring mysteries, the I Ching, or Book of Changes. More than just a divination manual, this cryptic text was believed to be a direct line to the cosmos itself, a living oracle that whispered the future through patterns of broken and unbroken lines. Legend says it began with the mythical emperor Fu Zai, who glimpsed its 8 trigrams, the foundational symbols of the I Ching, etched onto the back of a turtle emerging from the Yellow River. But this wasn't mere folklore. It was the birth of a system so profound that dynasties would rise and fall by its advice, and even a 20th century psychologist would champion its uncanny accuracy. At the heart of the I Ching's power lay the ritual of the yarrow stalks. Diviners would carefully split a bundle of 50 dried stalks, their movements slow and deliberate, as if the very act of handling them required communion with the unseen. Each split reduced the stalks into smaller groups, their counts determining whether a line in the hexagram was solid or broken. Modern mathematicians might recognize this as an early probability algorithm, a way to generate 64 possible hexagrams, each representing a snapshot of cosmic balance between yin and yang. But to Zhou dynasty shamans, this was no abstract exercise. When the Duke of Zhou expanded the trigrams into hexagrams around 1000 BCE, he infused each with poetic judgments and cryptic imagery, transforming mathematical patterns into a language the divine could speak through. Consider the hexagram lie, the clinging fire. Its lines depict flames rising upward, yet its commentary warns, perseverance brings success, care for the cow brings good fortune. To the uninitiated, it reads like nonsense, but for Emperor Wu of Han, consulting the I Ching before military campaigns, these words became strategic gold. Historical records show he interpreted the cow as supply lines, securing them would ensure victory. This wasn't fortune-telling, it was a mirror for the subconscious, a way to externalize intuition. Even Confucius, who initially dismissed the I Ching as superstition, later admitted, "If I had 50 years to spare, I would devote them to this book." Centuries later, Carl Jung would call this phenomenon synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that defy causal explanation but resonate with deep truth. He obsessively consulted the I Ching, marveling at how its hexagrams often eerily mirrored his client's psychological states. In one famous experiment, he asked the book about a patient's anima, feminine spirit, and received hexagram Kaon, the receptive, a symbol of yielding earth, perfectly capturing her struggle with rigid masculinity. Jung realized the I Ching didn't predict the future, it revealed the hidden threads connecting all things, a concept that would ripple through quantum physics and chaos theory. What makes the I Ching timeless isn't its accuracy, but its adaptability. Mao Zedong mocked it as feudal nonsense, yet secretly consulted it during the Long March. Silicon Valley entrepreneurs now use apps to cast virtual hexagrams before product launches. Whether scaffolded by spirituality or statistics, its magic endures because it taps into a universal hunger to feel the universe just once whisper back. Among the countless relics venerated in medieval Europe, none sparked more awkward devotion than the holy prepuce, the supposed foreskin of Jesus, preserved from his circumcision. At least a dozen churches across the continent claim to possess this sacred skin, each boasting miracles that ranged from curing blindness to making barren women fertile. The Abbey of Charroux in France displayed theirs in a jeweled reliquary, while the Lateran Basilica in Rome insisted theirs was the true prepuce gifted by an angel to Charlemagne. Pilgrims flocked to touch these relics, believing contact could heal diseases or absolve sins, creating a spiritual economy as competitive as it was bizarre. The theological gymnastics around this relic were as creative as its miracles. Since Christ ascended bodily into heaven, church scholars argued his foreskin must have been left behind, a divine loophole making it the only physical piece of his earthly form still on earth. Saint Catherine of Siena allegedly wore a replica as a wedding ring, claiming mystical union with Christ, but the real spectacle unfolded in 16th century Calcutta, Italy, where locals paraded their holy prepuce through town annually, swearing it emitted a sweet fragrance and glowed faintly during Easter. Skeptics like theologian Leo Alatius proposed it had multiplied miraculously, while others whispered rival churches had stolen the original, leaving fakes in its place. Science offers a darker explanation. Many relics, including purported holy prepuces, were likely crafted from dried animal membranes or even human skin harvested from medieval mummies. Chemical treatments could simulate miraculous properties: honey for sweet odors, phosphorus compounds for eerie glows. Yet the fervor wasn't just about fraud, it reflected medieval Christianity's tactile spirituality. In an era where heaven felt reachable through physical objects, the prepuce symbolized God's shocking humanity, his willingness to shed not just blood but flesh for salvation. The relic's downfall came in the 20th century. After centuries of tacit approval, the Vatican banned veneration of the holy prepuce in 1954, declaring it unseemly. Almost overnight, the various foreskins vanished, stolen from Calcutta's church in 1983, lost from other sites under suspicious circumstances. Today, only whispers remain, though conspiracy theorists claim secret collections still exist. The real lesson isn't about the relic's authenticity, but about belief's power to sanctify even the most improbable objects, and how quickly magic fades when institutions withdraw their blessing. In the end, the holy prepuce wasn't just skin. It was a mirror reflecting how desperately humanity clings to tangible proof of the divine, even when that proof comes in the most unexpected packaging. In the dense jungles of 19th century Yucatan, where Spanish colonial rule had fractured the ancient Maya world, a rebellion arose not led by a general or a king, but by a wooden cross that spoke. This was no ordinary Christian symbol. Carved from the sacred ceiba tree, the same tree the Maya believed connected the underworld to the heavens, the cruz parlante, the speaking cross, issued commands in a voice both human and unearthly. It dictated battle strategies to Maya rebels during the Caste War of 1847, promising victory against their oppressors if they fought under its banner. To the Spanish, this was heresy. To the Maya, it was proof their gods had found a new way to speak through the trappings of the very faith that had tried to silence them. The cross's origins were as mysterious as its messages. Emerging from the sanctuary of Chan Santa Cruz, a hidden rebel stronghold, it reportedly spoke through a ventriloquist, a Maya priest channeling both Catholic iconography and the old ways of divine communication. Followers claimed its voice rang out during ceremonies, its words transcribed by scribes into proclamations that blended biblical rhetoric with echoes of the Chilam Balam prophecies. "Kill the whites and the traitors," it commanded, "and the land will be yours again." This wasn't just rebellion, it was a spiritual reawakening where the cross became a vessel for Cayujal Ajor, the Maya's holy lord, reborn in a form the colonizers couldn't erase. The parallels to pre-Hispanic traditions were uncanny. Centuries before, the Dresden Codex, one of the few surviving Maya books, depicted gods whispering through idols, their words interpreted by priests during bloodletting rituals. Stelae at sites like Palenque showed rulers receiving visions from serpent-mouthed deities, their counsels shaping wars and harvests. The speaking cross wasn't an innovation. It was an adaptation, a way to cloak ancestral magic in a symbol the Spanish couldn't dismantle without blaspheming their own faith. Even the cross's location mattered. Chan Santa Cruz sat atop an ancient cenote, a portal to the underworld where the Maya had long communed with spirits. For 20 years, the cross's followers, called the Cruzab, dominated the Yucatan Peninsula. Their raids were eerily precise, timed to celestial events like the heliacal rise of Venus, a planet associated with war in Maya cosmology. At the height of their power, they even established a de facto state with the cross as their sovereign. British Honduras traders seeking leverage against Mexico smuggled them weapons, convinced the Cruzab were divinely favored. But the cross's influence waned as internal divisions grew and Mexican forces advanced. By the early 20th century, the rebellion faded, but the cross itself endured, enshrined in a chapel where devotees still gather to hear its whispers. What's most striking isn't whether the cross truly spoke, but what its voice represented. For the Maya, it was continuity, proof their gods could survive even baptismal fonts and forced conversions. For scholars, it's a case study in syncretism where oppression breeds ingenious spiritual resistance. And for anyone who's ever felt their history slipping away, the speaking cross is a reminder. Sometimes the silenced find ways to make the past speak through the cracks of the present. The grotto at Lourdes exists in two worlds at once: a rocky alcove in the French Pyrenees where spring water drips down mossy stone, and a place where time itself seems to bend under the weight of miracles. Since 1858, when a peasant girl named Bernadette Soubirous claimed the Virgin Mary appeared to her here, over 7,000 people have reported healings after bathing in or drinking these waters. Of those, only 70 have been declared medically inexplicable by the Lourdes Medical Bureau, an organization of skeptical doctors tasked with investigating claims under microscope-level scrutiny. Their archives read like medical thrillers, cases where metastatic cancers evaporated overnight, where atrophied optic nerves suddenly relayed light to blind eyes, where advanced tuberculosis left no trace in lungs that had been riddled with cavities weeks prior. Take the story of Vittorio Miceli. In 1963, Italian military doctors diagnosed him with an inoperable sarcoma so aggressive it had dissolved half his pelvis. Wheelchair-bound and given months to live, he traveled to Lourdes as a last resort. After immersion in the spring, witnesses reported seeing his twisted leg begin to twitch. Within months, X-rays showed new bone growth where only tumor had been a biological impossibility according to his original medical team. The Vatican didn't confirm the miracle until 1976, after 13 years of testing alternative explanations. Cases like his share eerie commonalities. Recoveries are often instantaneous without the gradual healing typical of remission, and leave no lasting tissue damage despite the severity of prior conditions. Yet for every Miceli, there are thousands who leave Lourdes physically unchanged. Harvard's placebo effect studies reveal fascinating parallels. Patients in controlled trials sometimes show measurable improvement when given sugar pills they believe are medicine. MRI scans demonstrate how strong belief can trigger real neurotransmitter responses, reducing pain or even stimulating immune activity. The grotto's environment, the collective anticipation of pilgrims, the ritual of candlelight processions, the weight of centuries of testimony could theoretically amplify this effect to extraordinary levels. But placebo science struggles to explain Lourdes' most baffling cases, like that of Sister Marie Simon-Pierre, whose advanced Parkinson's tremors ceased mid-prayer in 2005, with brain scans showing dopamine levels inexplicably restored. The Medical Bureau's process strips away ambiguity. Each claimant must provide exhaustive documentation, including pre- and post-healing biopsies and imaging, plus testimony from secular physicians. Only conditions with no known medical resolution qualify. A diabetic stabilized blood sugar wouldn't count, while the regeneration of a severed limb would. Even then, the Church imposes a final hurdle. Theologians must confirm the healing aligns with spiritual intent, not theatrical coincidence. This dual-layer scrutiny makes Lourdes' confirmed miracles uniquely compelling. They're anomalies that resist both biological and psychological frameworks. Perhaps the grotto's true power lies beyond the binary of miracle or placebo. For the millions who pilgrimage there, the water isn't just a potential cure, it's a liquid threshold between despair and hope. Whether through divine intervention, the mind's untapped potential, or some interplay of both, Lourdes remains a living laboratory of human resilience, one where faith, in its purest form, keeps rewriting the boundaries of what medicine dares to define as possible. High in the Himalayas, where thin air blurs the line between mind and matter, Tibetan monks speak of tulpas, beings conjured from pure thought. These aren't mere hallucinations, but entities so real they cast shadows, leave footprints, and even interact with the unwary. Explorer Alexandra David Neal stunned the West in the 1920s when she described manifesting her own tulpa, a jolly, rotund monk who grew so independent he began disobeying her commands before she dissolved him through weeks of intense meditation. To dismiss this as fantasy is to ignore the unnerving parallels with modern physics, where the act of observation literally shapes reality at the quantum level. The creation process, detailed in ancient Tibetan texts like the Bardo Thirdol, reads like a manual for bending consciousness. Monks visualize their tulpa down to the texture of its robes, feeding it attention until it develops autonomy, a concept mirroring quantum mechanics' observer effect, where particles exist as probabilities until measured. Psychologists call this thought form theory, the idea that sustained mental energy can temporarily warp perceptual reality. During the Cold War, the CIA's Stargate project took this horrifyingly literal. Declassified files reveal trained, remote viewers attempting to manifest physical objects or even human-like figures across distances, with some operatives reporting eerie success. One transcript describes a test subject materializing a translucent figure in a locked Virginia lab room, an event witnessed by 3 scientists, yet tulpas carry a dark edge Tibetan texts don't shy from. Without proper discipline, they can become psychic parasites, draining their creator's vitality. David Neal's monk allegedly developed a sinister grin she'd never imagined, while a 1930s Polish expedition to Lhasa recorded a Lama warning of tulpas imitating loved ones to manipulate emotions. This echoes modern accounts of tulpa creep, where online communities experimenting with thought forms report entities hijacking dreams or appearing unexpectedly in photographs. Parapsychologists suggest these phenomena might be projections of the subconscious or something far stranger. The most unsettling evidence comes from neuroscience. fMRI scans of advanced meditators show their brains can briefly synchronize with others at a distance, as if thoughts could ripple through the fabric of shared perception. If consciousness truly is a collaborative construct, then perhaps tulpas are less supernatural and more hypernatural glimpses of the mind's untapped potential to mold reality itself. Whether phantom or physics, one truth remains. In the high silence of the mountains, the line between what we imagine and what exists has always been thinner than we dare admit. In the small Italian village of San Giovanni Rotondo, a friar named Padre Pio carried wounds that defied medical explanation, deep, bleeding gashes mirroring the crucifixion wounds of Christ, appearing mysteriously in 1918 and remaining open, uninfected for 50 years. These weren't just stigmata, they were the centerpiece of a life so saturated with supernatural claims that even the Vatican, no stranger to miracles, hesitated for decades before declaring him a saint. Witnesses swore they'd seen Padre Pio in 2 places at once, praying in his monastery while simultaneously appearing at a dying man's bedside across the country. Others spoke of a celestial fragrance, the odor of sanctity, that clung to him even when he hadn't bathed for weeks, a scent so strong it lingered on letters he mailed across the world. The bilocation accounts are particularly baffling. During World War II, American bomber pilots stationed near San Giovanni Rotondo reported seeing a robed friar hovering beside their planes mid-flight, gesturing for them to turn back, only to land and find Padre Pio in his monastery, who chastised them for their intended bombing run. One pilot, Captain Carmine Vona, insisted the friar in the sky matched newspaper photos of Padre Pio exactly. Church investigators later authenticated over 100 similar cases, including a nun in Spain who claimed the priest heard her confession in her convent chapel while he was, by all physical evidence, confined to his Italian cell. Skeptics propose these were mass hallucinations or propaganda, but the sheer volume of independent testimonies from atheist soldiers to rival clergy makes collective delusion a shaky explanation. Then there's the mysterious scent, described as a blend of roses, incense, and something indefinably ethereal. It wasn't limited to Padre Pio's person. After his death in 1968, followers reported smelling it near objects he'd touched, even in sealed envelopes containing his prayer cards. Biochemists who analyzed fabrics from his vestments found no trace of perfumes or oils, yet the phenomenon persists to this day. In 2014, a neurologist proposed it might be linked to ketosis, a metabolic state where the body burns fat, producing acetone breath, but that fails to explain how the scent traveled across continents or why it's been documented around other saints like Thales of Lycia. What makes Padre Pio's case extraordinary isn't just the phenomena, but the Church's reluctant embrace of them. For years, Vatican officials banned him from saying Mass publicly, suspecting he'd self-inflicted his wounds with carbolic acid. Secret memos revealed suspicions that his confessions drew crowds because he allegedly used insider knowledge gossip from fellow friars to unnervingly precise effect. Yet when scientists examined his stigmata, they found no nerve endings in the wound edges, meaning he shouldn't have been able to feel, let alone continually aggravate the injuries. His canonization in 2002, after a thorough review of his healings, including a boy cured of fatal meningitis after touching one of Padre Pio's gloves, signaled the Church's eventual acceptance that some mysteries resist dissection. Perhaps the most compelling evidence lies not in archives, but in the continued experiences of ordinary people. Pilgrims to his tomb still report sudden healings, and secular journalists have documented the scent phenomenon in real time. Whether divine intervention or a yet unknown facet of human potential, Padre Pio's legacy endures because it forces a simple question. If such things can happen even once, what else might be possible? In an age of satellites and stem cells, his story reminds us that the line between miracle and mystery remains as thin as the veil between flesh and faith. From the whispering caves of Delphi to the glowing screens of modern ghost hunters, humanity's obsession with divine magic has never waned. These stories, whether etched on ancient temple walls or broadcast in viral videos, share a common thread. They're not just about the supernatural, but about us. Our hunger for meaning in chaos, for reassurance that the universe isn't indifferent, for proof that the boundaries of reality might still hold pockets of wonder. Think about it. Why do crowds still gather at Lourdes, or why do algorithms keep feeding us clips of unexplained phenomena? Maybe it's because, deep down, we're all still that wide-eyed child around a campfire, leaning in when someone whispers, and then the impossible happened. But here's the twist: these tales aren't just passive comfort. They are cultural mirrors. When Constantine saw a cross in the sky, was it divine intervention, or a leader shrewdly uniting a fractured empire under a new banner? When medieval villagers trembled at witch trials, were they fearing demons or their own neighbors? Even today, when someone swears their loved one sent a sign from beyond, Is it a glitch in perception or a necessary narrative to soften grief's edges? The magic isn't just in the events themselves, but in how they shape societies, steer history, and yes, sometimes expose our vulnerabilities. Yet for every skeptic armed with Occam's razor, there's a baffling exception. How do we explain Padre Pio's wounds resisting infection for 50 years, or the Maya's speaking cross issuing military tactics no peasant could have concocted? Science offers pieces of the puzzle: placebo effects, mass hysteria, quantum probabilities, but the full picture stays stubbornly out of focus. Maybe that's the point. These stories thrive in the liminal spaces, the gaps between what we can prove and what we feel in our bones. They're less about answers and more about the questions that keep us up at night. What if? Could it be? So now we turn to you. Have you ever stood in a quiet room and truly felt something unseen brush past, or witnessed a coincidence so precise it curled your toes? The most fascinating stories aren't in dusty manuscripts or lab reports. They're in the lived experiences of people just like you. Because whether these encounters are cosmic truths, brain glitches, or something in between, one thing's certain: as long as we keep telling them, the magic never really dies. It just changes form, waiting for the next curious mind to stumble upon it and wonder,